So, uh, hello everybody. We're here for another iteration of Distributed Teams Learning Pod. And today's topic is hiring. How to hire people for distributed teams. To start with, just some clarifications. We're talking here about existing teams, not building new teams completely from scratch, because that's a whole big separate topic. So today we assume that there is an existing team which we want to get additional team members for. And also what I wanted to highlight again as a note of warning is that we're talking about teams that are already fully distributed. And especially, we're definitely not talking about adding some kind of a remote worker to an existing co-located team, because that's a different thing, and B, it's a really bad idea. So I just wanted to highlight that. So the story that we assume that we're starting with, we have a team distributed that's running together more or less effectively, and we're trying to add people to it. So for some background, I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal experience, because we all come from our own personal experience. My experience is in the IT industry, so as a software developer, and then other roles in the software development pipeline. And maybe because I never applied to Google and Microsoft, but I always worked for smaller and medium companies, my experience in general has been that the software industry is pretty poor at the hiring process. So it's not scientific, it's not well organized. At many companies, it's not organized at all. And my experience has been that, there's just a lot of kind of, let's just talk to somebody, and then based on a gut feeling, people get hired or not. So, and also, mostly looking at reputation / history, so people's resumes, and very little thought really put into the human fit. So looking at distributed teams, I think we've had previous conversations about this, and I fundamentally feel that distributed teams are different, or shall we say more sensitive, than traditional teams. So really this requires, in all areas and including hiring, a much more thoughtful, a much more organized approach to how we do things, and especially hiring. Because I feel, this has been my experience, that whilst if you have a co-located team, so everybody's in an office together, if the culture is not fully aligned or people are not fully aligned, it'll still kind of putter along. The team might not be great performing, but they'll get stuff out, and it will kind of work. People might not like each other, it might not be great, but it'll still kind of work because everybody's in the same office and they can see each other and wave at each other, and the communication is easier. So even if you hire somebody who is not completely aligned, or not completely aligned to the culture, or not a great fit for the team, it can still kind of work out. Whilst in a distributed team, things are more fragile, so to speak. So if you put in and hire somebody who's really not aligned with the team, they will either completely fall out, so they'll get demotivated and stop working, or it can even break the whole team to have one person that's not aligned with the team. So my thinking is that as with all things in a distributed team, doing things poorly is not an option. So hiring misaligned people is not an option, because they will not kind of fall into alignment by default. They will either break the team or completely just fall out. So hiring well is an absolute must in a distributed team. One big advantage of being a distributed remote team is that well, now you're no longer limited to whatever your local commuting geography is for candidates. However, it puts you into the world of one of the big challenges, the tyranny of choice that we have. Suddenly, instead of hundreds, or let's say even a big city, tens of thousands of potential candidates, you have millions to even hundreds of millions of potential candidates, which is obviously too much to go through. So I definitely recommend one way that is easy, quick, and fair to limit your candidate pool is to look at the time zones, because really you need to be able to talk to people. And yes, people say like, oh yes, I can wake up at 6 a.m. for a meeting, or I can have a meeting at 10 p.m. For most people, it's not an optimal working hour. And even if they can do it once a week, if you suddenly need them for help, right, then you have to wonder, oh, am I going to pull them out of bed? Will they be available? It's just hard. So I definitely recommend picking, within 2-3 hours or so of your time zone, have a central time zone where the team is located. Of course, this is for people who work closely together. If you have somebody that's not working closely, they can be a little bit more distant, but definitely need to be aware of time zones. The second one, and this is one I struggle with somewhat, because I try to be, super inclusive and really open to the world. And I've lived all around the world. So I have, my current team is spread between Japan, Russia, Poland, Canada. So I try to be super open to all cultures. And I certainly love all cultures when it comes to travel. But with experience, what I've come to realize is that there is a difference in working culture. And I don't know, I mean, we can have this in discussion, but I don't think it's discrimination to say, for example, for me, when it comes to software developers, I like software developers from Slavic Eastern Bloc area, so anywhere from Poland, Russia, because there is just a certain kind of shared culture and attitude which makes it easier to work together. And in a distributed team, well, in any team, we need a shared culture. In a distributed team, I think culture becomes even more important because we don't see each other, and there's, more things go unspoken because we talk less. So creating culture alignment when you have people that are all from completely different cultures becomes much harder. And also when we're co-located, there is kind of a baseline culture, right? And we all kind of assume that we fit into the baseline culture of usually the place we're at. So I'll give a simple example, right? If the calendar says the meeting starts at 3, what time will the meeting actually start, right? And in some cultures, in Portugal, I don't work here professionally, but I can say in casual human terms, right? If somebody says 3, you shouldn't show up at their door before 3:30 because they won't be ready and they'll be confused. And that's just the culture. Whilst I know in other cultures, if you're through the door later than 3:05, that's late. In Japan, if the business meeting says 3 and you're not there 5-10 minutes beforehand, people will be offended. So there is this lots of unspoken cultural things, and this is just a small example. There's hundreds. What's good enough, what's done. When does a employee say that there is a problem to their manager or the person that's above them. And if you don't, so putting together a team, you need to be aware of the culture of every single person in the team, of where they're coming from. And if you end up with 5 people, each coming from 5 different cultures, that's going to be a lot of work to create alignment and create and emerge a shared culture that's somewhere, acceptable medium and combination of those 5 cultures. Whilst if you pick people who all come from a similar baseline culture, then it's much easier to create team alignment. One other area which I think is very important to be aware of is this idea of power distance. It's a sociological measure of how much distance there is between managers and employees, right? So a simple example, would you invite your manager to your wedding, right? In some countries, you wouldn't think to do, or, would you invite your manager for a beer after work? In some countries, you wouldn't even think of it because it's just different, it's almost like a different species. In other countries, either party would be offended if they weren't invited. And this comes through in work, right? If your manager tells you to do something that you think is ill-advised, will you speak up or will you not speak up? And this is very different in different cultures. And everybody needs to be aware of what this is and work to create the shared culture in the team. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is that with working remotely, what's possible and certainly common is that you work with people who are not working full time on that particular project. In fact, it's quite common. And there, I think you need to become really clear and aware. Are you going to work with this person on what I call task-based, which means this is the job, you do it, when is it going to be done? Done. In which case you have to organize the work and, you can't ever expect them to think outside the box much. They will deliver at best what you asked for. But you don't need to bring them into the team culture, it's much less onboarding. Or if you want somebody to be a real member of the team, which means they feel ownership, they suggest things, they work proactively, then you need to invest into onboarding the person into the team. And it's important to really appreciate how much time and effort on both parts, on the team and the people bringing in, but also the person coming in, it is to really understand the culture, all of the processes and everything of a team to really become and feel a member of it. And in many cases, it actually really requires going to a retreat together and meeting people in person to really build that connection and a sense of being part of the team. So I don't think it's really need to be aware that there's two options exist. You can just have somebody on a task basis, or you can have them on a full team basis. Both have pluses and minuses. But I think it's important to be clear in which form you want the person to be working with the team. So just to finish off, through the interviews, need to verify the communication ability, because in distributed teams, communication is really critical. And distributed teams require people that are able to be proactive, who can communicate in text as well as in voice, and who are aware of the nuances of text communication and distributed communication, so can be positive and know how to communicate in a distributed environment. Really need to verify through interviews the culture fit, because misalignment can cause bigger problems, and because the pool of candidates is, you're quite likely going to be working with a person that's living in another country, and their normal is not your normal. Then through the interview process, need to check for ability to work independently. So things such as freelance expertise, some people suggest having started own business, ability to organize work yourself, and ability to self-direct. Another thing which I think is very important in distributed teams, because you do not see the people you work with every day, which means you're working a lot of the time by yourself, motivation becomes really important. You don't have if you don't come to work in the morning, nobody will notice, quite probably, because you don't have a boss watching over. You don't even have, people at the next desk wondering, where is Victor this morning, or why is Victor late again? Which means you have to motivate yourself to get out of bed. So I think in hiring for distributed teams, really checking for motivation fit and really checking that the work fits with the passion and interests of the person that you're hiring is really quite important. Yeah, I think those are the key points that I had prepared for today. So maybe we can go to conversation and discussion now. Maybe just start with a round of general comments. Stefan?
Yeah, thank you, Victor. It was quite some material you aligned there. Really good. Yeah, I feel you're right, but you're still. I think we have to move a little bit further than you're touching upon country culture, whereas maybe you also mean company culture and value system. Earlier we talked about teal, and I think there's a really important thing lying in teal. For example, talking about purpose, and I think if the effective distributed team wants to be effective, personal purpose should more or less resonate with the team's purpose. Things like that. So that's and social intelligence. I think is really important. So that would be my general comments, and maybe we can talk a little bit further on that. I found a presentation on collective intelligence. So if effectiveness of a distributed team is also measured by its collective intelligence, then I have one sheet of a presentation which could be interesting to bring in. Yeah, that's my first comment. Yeah, thank you.
Andrzej?
Yes, so thank you for this presentation. What I think, my general comment would be that I'm really inclined into thinking that a cultural fit, whereas the culture is a culture of the organization, is important. I don't believe that geographical culture differences can somehow ban us from creating a distributed team, as long as everybody fits into the culture of an organization they're joining. I think, we are all living in a global world, and the ability to pull your talent from anywhere in the world really shouldn't be limited to your own time zone or your own cultural background. I think you can, of course, there will be people that find it extremely hard to adapt to a culture of an organization because they come from a specific place on earth. But I think that's why you're pulling for the people that will be a culture fit with you, and so that they can be from anywhere. And I feel like the most important question you have to ask yourself, and I think that's the question that people don't ask themselves when they are hiring for distributed teams, is whether a person is able to work remotely. And that means not everyone is made for working remotely. And we have to admit that. It's not like you can take any person, any employee, and then throw them into distributed team and then have them all have the same results because they are great people, right? Or if you hire a person, you cannot expect them, giving them a basic set of tests, you cannot expect them to start working remotely efficiently, because they need two things. One of them is ownership, because you have to get yourself out of bed, because you have to plan out your day, because you shouldn't be late for the meetings, and that's up to you not to be late for them, and nobody's going to pat you on your back and tell you, hey, there's a meeting going on, let's go. Nobody's going to do that. So you really have to take responsibility of your own time. to be able to fit in the team. And the second thing is emotional intelligence. And that's something that is important if you're collocated, but it's super important if you're distributed, because a lot of things, a lot of context, and a lot of emotions that are normally conveyed using extraverbal means, like, all the body language thing, that doesn't really work that well in a distributed team. So you have to be reading between the lines. You have to be somehow trying to apprehend what other people are doing on the team, and how they're doing it, and trying to really anticipate if something bad is going on, if people have problems. And that collectively I call emotional intelligence, and that's something that's really important on a distributed team. So when you're pulling for talent, when you're hiring, focus on hiring people that can manage their own time, and pull for people that have this emotional intelligence. And you can, use a variety of tools, situations, and more than tests. I would say probably talking about specific situations in a person's life, or maybe simulating a situation is a good idea to see if that person really does have that emotional intelligence that's needed for the team. So these two things, I guess, are the most important. Yeah.
Yeah. André, when you said emotional intelligence, I mentioned social intelligence. I think it's interesting to see if there's a difference. I meant more or less the same. Yeah.
I guess we both meant the same thing.
Yeah. I have an interesting sheet because we talk about distributed teams and co-located teams, and then also about so co-located would be face-to-face meetings. Let me show you this sheet because it's interesting. It's from a presentation. Share screen. So can you see it?
Yes.
So this is from research from Professor Thomas Malone. He's I think it's Stanford University, but I have to look at it. So an American professor, and here shows if there is a difference between people working face to face or people working online. So roughly you can see there's not much of a difference between the red line and the blue line, which was kind of surprising. And also in this presentation he said, even if people don't see each other like we do now, they just do it with text. People are that clever, if they are clever, socially sensitive, emotionally sensitive enough, they can read between the lines of even simple text messages. So that was kind of a surprise, because I also tend to think if you can't see each other in the eyes, it's difficult to probe how somebody is feeling. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. I can share the link to the whole presentation because he also talks about...
Please.
Yeah, please do. This is super interesting.
Yeah, he also talks about the number of women in the team. And I think it's roughly when there's about 60% of women, they do better than where a majority of men are in. And I guess that comes down to women being better able to read somebody's feelings and emotions. And that's, by the way, also we talked about that much earlier in the whole learning path. There's a research what Google learned from its quest to build a perfect team.
Yes.
That's they more or less had the same conclusion, that it's all about social intelligence.
So from what I remember, the Google one was about trust and psychological safety. So for people being able to put ideas into the team and feel safe that they're able to do it. So
Yeah.
we have a little bit of time and a few topics. I would like to start by exploring the culture one.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the kind of culture, the country or regional culture, the organization's culture, and of course, each of us within that differs a lot. Each of us has our own personal culture and way of working. And yeah, I'm really interested in what your experiences have been with working with people from completely different countries, because I've worked in many countries and each country had a different culture, and there were certainly a lot of uh, tensions and problems caused by the differences in culture. And yeah, they're just different expectations. So for me, I've really, as we're looking to hire developers now, both for time zone and for cultural differences, I'm limiting myself, our search to people from Eastern Europe. Doesn't mean that, yeah, I mean, it's, if you look at something like Upwork, right, there's 10, 20 million, something like that, people on there, and probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of software developers who would fit the technological profile of what our organization needs. And you somehow need to cut that down to, what's the most that you can process realistically. Let's say 2-3 dozen people, right? Not you can't even effectively interview 100 people. It's just not enough hours in a day. Like 10 good candidates is much better than 200 ones which you don't know anything about. So this is, for me, I mean, I started off trying to go much wider, but now I've settled in on a more limited, on using this as a filter. It's an approximation, but I think it's an easy one. So what have your experiences been with integrating people from different country cultures into one team?
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. In my experience with working with people from different countries hasn't been online that much, but it has been. When I graduated, when I did my master's in business administration, I did did an elective on Japan and the world economy, because that was in the early 90s. I am European or Dutch. I've been working in the US quite a bit, so Japan was coming up really quick at that time. So I wanted to learn more about that. And in the end, I ended up working with a Japanese company located in the Netherlands, helping set up their head office. So yes, the majority was Japanese there, about 25 Japanese people. I recruited some local people, so there were about 5-6 local people. So a bit of a bizarre difference in numbers. And it was difficult at times. I fully agree. I had studied the culture. I even learned the language a little bit. So I was open to it, open to learn from it, but it still was kind of hard. Especially because Japanese find it hard to talk about it. And there's no such thing as teal there. Although Frederick Laloux's book has sold a record high in the first month. They sold 30,000 copies there, which is kind of a new record. It's about 10% of the total sales so far. So it was difficult in different cultures, even though you're open to it. But I would say we can overcome it and create sort of a general business culture. Kind of an open culture, because if you meet up with teal teams from wherever, you connect quickly, you read each other well. So if the organization culture is strong, it can overcome country culture. Let's finish with that. You have to be open-minded, and it has to be mutually open-minded. Otherwise, it won't work. Yeah.
Answer?
Yeah, so I haven't been really hiring for distributed teams, but I hired for collocated teams, and yes, I deliberately hired people from different cultures. Because what I think happens to a team that is multicultural is it's getting more humble, it's getting more tolerant, it's getting more understanding in general about not only each other's culture, but human being in general. And the group has, if you are assimilating someone into the group, then the group is really responsible for the assimilation process, not the boss or whoever is there. The group will assimilate an individual. If there's someone coming from the other side of the world into a group that's based on the other side of the world, then the group on the other side will assimilate that individual coming from afar. But then if you have teams that are really a mix of cultures, that's difficult to combine because of the difficulties and the differences that people go through. And that's why you need social intelligence. Because if you have social intelligent beings, they will work it through and they will create, that level of synergy because of that cultural difference that can bring the team like 3-4 levels up, just because they're different, just because they are more understanding. And this is what I always say, that of course expertise is important, right? It's important to be an expert, it's important to have knowledge, but it's also important to be a understanding and socially intelligent human being. And maybe it's even more important, because if you have the right attitude and you want to learn and you want to collaborate, then you're probably gonna, you can be an expert if you want, but you're much better at collaborating and at doing things together. And from the systems theory, we know that you have a group of people, the individual contribution is usually no more than 5%. 95% of the net profit or the output of the team comes from all the entities, all the people on the team working together. So having a star in your team doesn't mean that that person is pulling the whole team. It only means that that person can produce, but probably no more than 5% of the output. So collaboration is important more than expertise. And one important thing that you said is that when you're hiring people, you can have two different strategies, right? Either you have customers locally and you need people to be from similar time zones, or you need high level of integration within that team. So those people have to really collaborate together. And even a single shift in the time zone can somehow impair the way they collaborate. Then you are pulling for the people from the same time zone or similar time zone. But if you want to work with the sun around the clock, and there are lots of teams that do it, and you will set up one team on one side of the planet and the other one on the other side, then those people will probably come from different cultures, right? That they will be two separate teams, two teams from two different cultures. But again, this depends on your strategy. So what is that you need? You have to ask yourself and then pull for the right talent and in the right place.
Yeah. So I agree. It's definitely, I didn't mean to imply that it wasn't possible to integrate people from completely different cultures. I work in the context of small teams, and just the cost of integrating, and we're a small developing team, so we don't have strong enough onboarding processes to break people into the organizational culture. So I think it's a matter of being aware how expensive in terms of time and energy it is to create the culture from people from many very different original cultures. And certainly if you have people that share some third new culture, like Stefan suggested, teal or something else, then that you can base the shared culture on something like that, which already the people share. That definitely shortens the path much more. But if you don't have something like that as a presumption, then need to be really aware, and we'll have another conversation around onboarding. I think co-located, it's hard enough. In a distributed team where everything else is already very hard, I think having very different cultures might be too much for many teams. But it's certainly possible for some teams, and for some people, like you say, because they need to follow the clock or they need to have local people in different countries, it makes sense. But I guess I would just caution the people that are thinking about this to be aware and add, if you're trying to add people from a very different culture, you're adding difficulty onto your process. So be aware and plan accordingly.
So, Victor, just one thing about the recruitment. I'm just thinking, teal is not well spread, so you may want to look for people that are a little bit before that. So, would you look for agile, for example, in resumes? That people, that's probably on everybody's resume.
Yes, certainly in software development, that could be it. Another thing which is emerging in software is looking at people's open source contributions.
Open source, yeah.
And it might not seem like culture at this start, but it does. It is related to culture because it's a way of openness, of fitting into a team, of being, sharing with the thing. So there is a cultural component. And also now, or contributions on Quora or Stack Exchange or other things like this, where you can see how people are out there in the world in reality, not just in the beautified form that they have created on their resume. So yeah, but I think it's actually an interesting, so to speak, use case for Teal or Management 3.0 or deliberately learning organizations or one of these other things, right?
Yeah.
And it shows how they're important, because if somebody, is strong or strongly say they're strongly aligned with one of these things, you understand immediately that it will be that much easier to bring them into your team culture if that is part of your team culture.
So, yeah, it will be more or less more important to look for those kind of features instead of knowledge about C++ or whatever language, programming language or specific software skills. You would look for those kind of skills. I agree. Open source, I think, is a wonderful one because people are passionate about what they do. I would presume that. So, yeah. Okay, those are good ones. Look how much they share, write about the things, how much open they are. Yeah, great.
But also, I think you don't have to limit yourself to the expertise that you're looking for, because like exploring vulnerability, for example, is a good idea to see how much potential a person has for being a socially intelligent person. So if they can unlock, the door, and they can tell you about, not really about how they code in C++ and since when they do it and how awesome they are, but they can also tell you about themselves as a person, about their histories, about what they went through, about their failures, their successes.
Yeah.
This is something that usually you talk about during an HR recruitment process, but really, connecting at that level as well gives you an overview of who you're hiring, and that's important.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I tried to talk about this. I don't know if I expressed it strongly enough. It is absolutely critical when hiring for a distributed team to really explore the human side, not just look at task or past performance or something like that, but see how the person communicates, how they give and receive feedback, which is also part of communication in a way, how proactive they are, all those kinds of skills which are crucial for a distributed team. Again, it goes for the background for where I come from, IT software development, which has, at least in my experience, been pretty heavily weighed towards evaluating people's technical skills. Tell me what this, Java, whatever function does at an interview, which to me always seemed like, at least since the internet, so for the past 20 years, it seemed like, but I could Google that, right? Why are you asking me the side effect semantics of this particular operation in Java? I'm like, okay. But not enough time put into the human side, and there has to be, I think it's probably something at the level of 50-50 at least. The person's skill ability versus the person's human and team ability.
Yeah. Right. Very good.
So you mentioned, Stefan, brought up organizational purpose aligned with personal purpose. Can you talk a little bit more about that and any ideas you have around how you would check this in an interview?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's say modern organizations, especially and next stage organizations have a good purpose. If I would recruit, if I would be looking at from the outside, first I would see, okay, has this organization a really good purpose, and has it some kind of transformative element in it. It can be a purpose can be sometimes scaled down to a simple objective, or it can be something really with a social sustainability impact, something that will change things. I think that's really important. And about somebody personally, so if somebody really feels that purpose resonates with his or her own feelings, let's put it to feelings first, they will feel resonance. They will feel resonance and say, okay, this is really good. This is really good. And that makes you come out of bed every morning. You take responsibility, because if you're a real, you want to learn, you want to contribute to that purpose, and to bring it out in the world to make that change. So I think people have to be a little bit, I am thinking, when are you passionate about something? I think you're passionate when your values are in such a way that's it's difficult. That's a whole other subject. But I think, if you're a passionate software developer, let's stick to that one. And you're probably a passionate learner, and if probably people just go beyond just software development. You can work anywhere as a software developer. I mean, there's more demand than there are people. So if I would choose an organization with a really great purpose, that will leave a better world. So if there's a fit, what I personally feel is important with what the organization stands for, then it will resonate, and then there's no need for a boss to say, okay, get out of your bed and do this and do that. There's no need. I will tell my boss, say, hey, listen, I came up with this idea. I think it's really good. Any comments on it? So, okay, in software it's a little bit more difficult. But, so, yeah.
Anton?
Yeah, so don't you think that we're really going towards something called intuition here? And online, in a distributed model, when you're hiring remotely, I think intuition is even more important. If you're hiring for somebody who knows Java, then it shouldn't really be that difficult to run a few tests for them. But if you're looking for someone who's, for example, socially intelligent, right, this is going to be more difficult. And so intuition is something that people develop throughout their lives. It's not something that some people have it from the scratch, but most people have to develop it. And so what it boils to in the end is that we have to really know who we're looking for. So we have to know ourselves. And that's something that, is underestimated in a collocated environment where you're just telling the HR department to find you the right people. But in the end, it's going to be your vibration. If you're going to work with that person on the team, it's going to be your vibration, or maybe the team member's vibration that needs to match together. That has to be their vibe. So intuition and knowing who you're looking for. I've seen a lot of managers and a lot of employees going together remotely and parting ways very soon because they cannot work together, which means that the process is really technically oriented and not human oriented. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway would be to really make sure that the process is human oriented, and then we have expertise, right? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, or we're talking about purpose, because myself also, since reading the Reinventing Organizations book, I've been thinking a lot about it, but I've struggled to really define it for the organizations that I work for. It seems like a pretty advanced level. But I'm really encouraged that you mentioned values, Stefan, because I've done the values exercise with pretty much every group that I work with, and that one was fairly easy or doable. Even people that are not into reinventing organizations or studying just, ordinary developers. And I was worried about this because, they're very good developers, but organizational development is not their focus. But still, we were able to sit down and have a conversation in a team. What are our values? What do we care about? So I think values, in my personal experience working with different teams, defining what are the 2-3 values that are important in how we work together is a much more achievable goal for every team. I think every team, what is important in how we work together. I think every team of adults is capable of having that conversation with a few right questions. And I think using that as a hiring criteria can be very helpful. Of course, it won't be 100%, but at least getting the people that you're talking to think about, this is what we value when we work together. How do you feel about it? Is it important? I think that can be a easier exercise than purpose, which can be kind of very high up there and high level for many people. So I think the values, using values as one of the hiring criteria and defining the culture of a team is an accessible and easy way to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good exercise to focus on values, because you're building the team then. You're building the team spirit, getting to know each other, and if there are differences in values. Yeah, no, I agree. So the exercise we did a couple of weeks ago, that's really good as well. And I heard a friend of mine who's working with young people that are really difficult, don't really fit into school, or they're all kinds of problems. The first thing she does with those group of people is look at their values and let them determine their own values as a group, which is really good. She sticks them on the wall and reminds the people of those values. Like, this is what you said.
That's great. So that's interesting confirmation from another field that actually values it's a more accessible thing than purpose, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have been talking about, I've got one key other question I wanted to get your ideas on. Mm-hmm. I'll leave that one for last. Do you have any other things you'd like to cover in this conversation that you think are important that we haven't talked enough about yet? Stefan? Andrzej, no?
Oh, well, I think, no, I'm just, we talked about it. And so I think the open source thing is really something that I find intriguing. But we talked about that. Also because open source, you come back to why software operating systems like Linux were built in the first place. That's an amazing thing, eh? And that happened in a distributed way, more or less. So I think that's really
and
important.
the great thing with open source is it allows you to really publish your work into the open, which is not possible in most other cases when you're working for a company for obvious reasons. But here you can have your work visible fully for the world. So that's great. Okay. If it's okay, then I would like to move on to my last question. And this one, I have the question more than I have answers. So I'm interested in this conversation. As I was reading through the different articles out there and trying to study up on remote hiring, one thing that multiple articles say is for remote teams, you need people that are more mature, that are self-organized, self-motivated. They have to be experienced. Basically, they say don't hire anybody junior. Don't hire, any new people. But to me, that seems kind of like, well, what's happening with our movement then, right? I believe every organization needs and benefits from having young people, or doesn't have to be young, but junior people as part of the team for various reasons, because there's always tasks which are not fun for the senior people, but still important for the organization, and they're great learning jumping off points for junior people. Of course, also for cost reasons, if you only have senior people, what sense does that make? But then, of course, on the flip side, I fully appreciate where those sentiments come from, that you need people that can organize themselves and deliver on their own processes and even be able to say what their values are when they're aligned with these particular values or purpose. So how do we square this circle? What do you think, Stefan? You're muted.
My two things about it. I think it's I'll just say the word. I think it's bollocks, and not to hire juniors. Although age-wise, you also want to have a nice mixture of people. If the junior person would fit the culture as we discussed, then it would be excellent. Then again, okay, a junior has more to learn than more seniors in the team. So I would always add the peer-to-peer learning, have a mentor connected to the junior, but also the mentor can learn from the youngster. So I would maybe couple a junior to an older person, which would make a nice mixture. Learning would be both ways. So, and I think that's great. I mean, that's really motivating. The company I work for, that's of course also in software development, but it's co-located. We have juniors, and they're one of them is a girl from Bulgaria. And she's a lot of fun. She's a Barbie in IT, she calls herself. But it's a lot of fun. And she's really good. She's really good at software development. So, but obviously there's some learning there to be done. But I learned from her as well. So, yeah. Thank you.
Andrzej?
Yeah, I think I really second Stefan here. I guess it's bollocks, and it's a very general thing to say. Don't hire juniors, right? I can think about juniors that can excel with seniors, not only in skills but also in what kind of team collaborators, for example. They are, and you can never say, as long as you have a good hiring process, you shouldn't really be looking at age, right? Because you care about what kind of human being they are, and can they collaborate, and how much experts they are in what they're supposed to do. So definitely not. I think this we shouldn't be widening the gap by hiring only seniors, and the generation gap, we should actually be making it smaller, and we should encourage people to work together across generations, because if we can do that, provided we can hire the right people, okay, but if we can do that, then the culture is immensely richer if you can not only have people from different cultures but also from different generations, for example. And that's a physical generation to really put aside, but we're also talking about juniority and seniority in terms of expertise. And I think you should always mix, because you always need something to do for the seniors to do in their end game in the company. And the end game is usually, I know how to do stuff. So you either have to give me a super interesting project, and that might not be very easy, or you give me a couple of juniors so I can teach them. And everybody falls for that, because this is just interesting. This is like becoming a teacher, at some point in your life. It's just fun to show people your skills, show off, and at the same time educate the young generation, the junior generation uh, of people. So I think you need juniors and seniors, so that you can have this fluency and engagement from both sides.
Cool, thank you. Well, I'm encouraged that you both think that it is possible to have juniors in a team, because it's certainly my hope. My personal thought on this is that, this need for ability to be self-directed in work and self-organized and self-managed, it actually fits in with my other interest, is this whole idea of unschooling and self-directed learning. I think, every skill, humans are super flexible. I believe most skills are learned, not inborn. And the current education system is focused on making people helpless and teaching them to work within a strict framework. I think that the next generation is going to, if you learn from a young age that you have to self-direct, self-organize, and make things happen yourself, it's just going to be automatic by the time at 20, whatever, you go to work. So I think there is a strong link there. And also, I think the younger people being more used to and more comfortable with remote collaboration. I mean, let's face it, a lot of young people today are learning very powerful remote collaboration through playing collaborative games. I don't play it, but I read about it, and the guilds and other organizations that actually form in online games are very much distributed organizations. So I think maybe it's kind of like an in-between time where the young people haven't really gotten enough experience through alternative learning or games or such to know how to collaborate in a distributed way. But I think that actually probably at some point, I don't know whether it's going to be 5 or 20 years from now, I don't have any timelines, there's going to be a generation for whom distributed collaboration is going to be natural and default. And they will actually be quite likely much better at it than we are. So I think that's it for me today. Maybe we can have a closing round, just last few comments, thoughts to close off this video. Stefan?
Yeah. I might just add a little bit to that. There's I'll share that with you guys. John Seeley Brown, who's works with John Hagel, and they have written about new ways of learning. They even take the example of the World of Warcraft, which is an excellent example. It's amazing how learning takes place there in a remote way with so much effectiveness. I think that's a really good example. There's another interesting example of the surfers in Hawaii and how they learn. I'll share that with you guys. It's a great example. No, I loved doing this. Any final remarks? No, I think maybe did you check if somebody wrote about this hiring in effective distributed teams?
Yes, I have a reading list and I've been making summaries. Of course, this is the great thing that probably 15 years ago there was not much. Now there is lots of links.
Yeah.
Though, yeah, I mean, like, like I say, a lot of them said don't hire juniors, and the wisdom here is that actually it is possible. So
yeah, I agree. So we should write about that. That's my final comment then.
great. Andre?
Thank you.
Yeah, I loved it. It was a very nice discussion. Kind of let me structure the knowledge I have and edit on top of that because there's a lot of interesting things that was said here. I don't think there's enough information about distributed teams in the internet that is really tested in battle. I don't think there's enough information. There are a lot of people who think how things should work and that are very general about expressing that and describing that. But I think we're really touching on a very important set of things. And with hiring, the two takeaways are aim for ownership, aim for social intelligence, and don't be afraid of cultures. That is my bottom line. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. I guess my closing comment will be is distributed teams can be great, but only if you approach them the right way and with a learning mind and the attitude and understanding that you actually don't know, that we don't know. Even the people there's few people that have decades of experience organizing and running distributed teams because they haven't been around that much. So if you have an open and a learner's mind, it is possible. And the same thing with hiring. Really need to take it seriously, take the human side seriously, and always be learning. Thank you.